Great, thank you, Natalie. And hi, everybody. I'm calling live from South Philadelphia in my living room. and glad that I could be a part of this. So I think, Natalie, if we could do the poll questions, maybe just to get everybody warmed up. We just have a few poll questions for people, if you wouldn't mind. This panel by no means is just for people who are business owners or thinking of starting a business, but we did want to just get a sense for who may be business owners in the audience, and also to get a sense for whether or not you are currently working with global partners or you're looking to enter into global markets. So, and this is also good for our panelists to see too, because we want to know who's out there. So we'll just give you all a couple seconds here. Great. So it looks like a nice, pretty much split here of a handful of people who intend to start a business, some that that have already, and then pretty much a split of people who've worked globally and who are looking to work globally. So you came to the right place. So I just want to kick things off to introduce myself and give a little bit more information about the Global Startup Accelerator. I am Michelle Freeman, and I run a company here in Philadelphia called Witty, and we're really focused on civic engagement and civic focused, really community engagement work and creating experiences, which is a very important thing for me to distinguish these days, because our work has pre-COVID typically been a lot of in-person gatherings and meetings and events. And now what we're really realizing is the importance of creating experiences versus having to rely on in-person events, and getting really creative about the ways that we can connect with each other. In terms of this session and this topic, when we're thinking globally, it's my thought that because of technology, we're able to do that so much more and be able to connect with more people globally, and kind of this playing field is kind of equalized in some ways because of that. As Natalie mentioned, this is part of and designed by the Global Startup Accelerator, which is a collaboration between the Welcoming Center for New Pennsylvanians and the University City Science Center. I do want to just give you a little more information about the Global Accelerator, because I feel that when you hear a little bit more about it, you'll see and get a little more context to why we're here today. So startup companies in the greater Philadelphia region that want to do business internationally often face challenges in establishing global strategy, especially today. So in 2018, the Welcoming Center and the Science Center joined forces to launch the Global Startup Accelerator to foster the global entrepreneurial ecosystem in Philadelphia. And this program is funded by the EDA. So I know that we have the current cohort with us. So welcome to the 10 companies. They've been focused on impact technologies and on getting access to the Indian market. And as again, Natalie mentioned, will be, for those of you who are sticking around, you'll be able to hear pitches from those companies. So here we are, and one thing I kept writing in my notes is the word pivot, because that's what we have found ourselves doing a lot of, I think, regardless of our industry and sector. And today we have a panelist of professionals that are from all types of sectors. So I'm happy to introduce them. And what I'm going to do is ask each of our panelists to take a minute or two to introduce yourselves. And if you could point to an example of a company that you've seen pivot in a way that was impressive to you, and maybe just mention briefly what it was that really caught your eye. I want to welcome Linda, Michael, and Ross, and I'd like to pass it to Linda first, if I could. Oh, Linda, you're muted.
Sorry. Thank you, Michelle. And thank you also, Karina and Blondine, for the opportunity that the World Trade Center of Greater Philadelphia, where I serve as president, has had to work with the Global Startup Accelerator program. This is an extraordinary time to be involved in global trade. Certainly, prior to the pandemic, we had suffered a little bit of a downturn due to global trade sanctions and the like. And now with the pandemic, global growth is forecast to decline, but is expected to regain early part of next year. And by 2050, and I just wanted to share this with you because I always tell companies or share with companies, if you're involved in global trade, you're involved for the long haul. Global trade is expected, the world economy rather is expected to double in size by 2050, led by China and then India, then the United States, and then Indonesia. So the long-term forecast is a very, very good one. Just a word about the World Trade Center of Greater Philadelphia, and then I'd like to mention a company with whom we've worked that has managed to do that pivot in this environment of COVID-19. We are a nonprofit and membership organization. We've been around since 2002, and our mission simply, and it's more important than ever, is to bring economic growth and prosperity to businesses, neighborhoods, communities in Greater Philadelphia through global trade and investment. We do that by providing educational programs, one-on-one trade counseling, providing assistance in participation in trade missions and trade shows, and educational programs that range the gamut from our annual Global Business Conference to programs that focus on China and India and Southeast Asia and global finance, among many others. And during this time, we've had to pivot to do more virtual programming in a way that allows our companies to have the best information so they remain engaged in global markets for the future. And if I think of a company that has made that pivot, Michelle, it's a company called Annie International. And we, as a World Trade Center, we work with companies in southeastern Pennsylvania and southern New Jersey. And this company was involved internationally for a number of years, has been in beauty supply products, for example. Well, they've supplied beauty supply products to salons around the world. This included providing face masks for the salons. Well, now they've pivoted and they are providing N95 and other masks to respond to the pandemic. They had to do that pivot very quickly. They had to abide by regulations governing PPEs, but that's one example. I have other examples of companies who have made this pivot in products. Some companies have made pivots to other markets, for example, showing flexibility and resilience. So I look forward to questions and to providing you with some information about what I think the fundamentals are that to keep in mind during this time, and why it's important for companies to consider, and startup companies to consider export markets. Thank you, Michelle. Great,
thank you, Linda. Michael, can I ask you to go next?
Certainly. Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to the panel. I'm here to learn as much as I am to impart some of the things that we're doing. My background is basically economic development. Although I was trained as a lawyer, most of my career initially was spent in the public sector. At one point, I ran economic development in New York City, actually during the bankruptcy of New York City, and then segued into the private sector, where initially I ran a law firm focused on economic development, and then became both a developer and an investor and a financial participant in these types of projects. But the focus has always been economic development. And ultimately, what economic development is all about is attraction of business. Too often it gets tied up with real estate, where people believe that if you build a building, then you're really contributing something to the economy or the expansion of business. But buildings really just house what activity it can be created in them. And so increasingly over my career, I've been focused on direct accessing of the businesses and helping them grow, in part to attract them to some of our projects that we're doing, but primarily to sort of create an operating situation and focusing on what actually happens in the space rather than simply preparing the space and leasing it. So when you talk about pivot, and it's not necessarily related to COVID, but it's been almost coexistent with it, is my organization and my partners have been pivoting towards the operational side of space, focusing on how you bring people together, how you create connectivity, how you do that in an environment that normally where you're packaging people into high density space, how you can do that but keep them safe. Towards that end, we've created a relationship with a company called Delos that operates nationwide and focuses on wellness, and it actually goes through design. They work with Gensler to create COVID-free design as well as the COVID-free operations. I guess never COVID-free, but less vulnerable to COVID. So the challenge, I think, particularly with these kind of centers, is on the one hand, you want to create connectivity, you want to bring in as many people as you can with different skill sets. On the other hand, you want to avoid the problem of too much density excuse me. You want to, working out of the house sometimes has an issue. You want to avoid the problem of too much density simply for health reasons. But so the pivot has been a combination of, number one, focusing on the activity, bringing in different kinds of partners that can deal with activity as opposed to simply preparing and selling space. Towards that end, I've become a partner in two related firms. One is a opportunity zone firm that funds businesses as opposed to funding the real estate. We believe there's a great profitability as well as social dynamic in funding the businesses themselves. And secondly, an offshoot of that company, which owns funds in Israel and in other countries, which I'll get to when we start talking about how you create a mix of flow from foreign to here and here to foreign. They provide all kinds of services, events, promotion, marketing, because I think the real key to assisting businesses are twofold. One, how do you attract them in the first place? Being a classic economic development person, my first instinct is to try to get government assistance to provide grants or soft loans or other types of assistance to offer those companies as an inducement to bring them here. But perhaps the most important thing is, how do you service them? How do you help them market their services, connect them with potential vendors, with likely partners, with the market? So I guess in a broad sense, what I'm trying to do is bring to your field, which is how you create businesses and attract businesses in the first place, some of the economic development models that I've used.
Thank you, Michael. And Ross, can we have you chime in with a little introduction?
Sure. Thank you, Michelle. Great to be here. Thank you for inviting me, and I'm excited to join all of you for this topic. My name is Ross Steinman. I'm in the academic world. I have appointments at two universities, one university in the psychology department, and then at Temple University in the Department of Marketing and Supply Chain Management. I am a consumer behavior professor and researcher and a global educator, having taught in many different courses, many different countries, including Japan, Singapore, Colombia, and Italy. Most of the work that I do in the academic world, in the scholarly world, includes looking at branding. I look at consumer decision making, and I look at how we can measure consumers' attitudes, intentions, and prospective behaviors. And I've applied that, to my consulting work out with the media as well as with companies. When addressing the question about the pivot, I have two quick examples. One is the industry that I'm in, higher ed. This is, when you think about higher ed, it's the size of a cruise ship, and it typically moves very, very slowly. Changes are slow. But during this pandemic, when it first occurred, and now today, it's been remarkable at looking at both universities, but especially Temple, how they've been able to adapt and adjust. I'm not going to say it was seamless, but overall, students have been pleased and faculty have been able to get on board with the changes and still deliver a high value educational system to our students during this challenging time. And I think it'll improve and enhance the system overall. But one other company that comes to mind for me is a company by the name of Chowbotics. And they are an interesting company. They are basically in kind of the robot food delivery sector, if that is a sector. They're based out of Northern California, and they provide these kiosks where you can get a custom-built fresh salad, out of a machine, if you will. So largely, they were positioned and launched to provide healthy options in a variety of places where they might not have been accessible before. But how they've been able to pivot during this time is really a positioning question, because even at Jefferson Hospital in Philadelphia, we have, of course, all of these essential workers who need to be there, and the cafeteria is closed. So Chowbotics has been there, their machines have been there, and they've provided an opportunity for the essential workers to eat and eat healthy during this time period. So with that being said, I'll turn it back to you, Michelle.
Thanks, Ross.
Okay.
And that is reminding me that a couple of the accelerator companies, I do want to give a shout out to. Blondine and Karina were sharing that Dynable used to, for now at least, do a lot of food service in person for in-person events. And now they are pivoting to a model where they can actually figure out a way to deliver some types of food to virtual events. So not sure exactly how that will play out, but it sounds like a good move. And NeuroHealth, which typically their company offers mobile and low-cost avenues for mammogram screenings, and they have now pivoted to screening, somehow funding screening for lungs for reasons of screening for COVID. So it's been exciting to see some of these companies really figure out how to move quickly, and we also know it's been very, very challenging, for everybody. And trying to navigate this sort of new reality that we're in. But I do think that our city and region here in Greater Philadelphia is in a really good position to keep moving forward. It's such a strong community, and we're seeing so many companies just step up and make commitments to equity and to stand up against racial injustice. So I just feel that even though there are days I'm sure we're all waking up a little bit stressed and sick of our living rooms, that there is a lot of good stuff to look forward to. So the one thing I do want to mention to all of you is we want this to be as interactive as we can swing, right? So we do want to hear more from our panelists. Feel free at any time that you want to leave comments, feedback, and questions in the chat at any time, because I will be keeping an eye out for that feed. I will kick off with, I have a question for each of the panelists, a little catered toward each of your backgrounds, but again, I really want to encourage everybody to throw questions in the chat, and I will weave them in over the next 40-45 minutes that we have together. So Linda, I'm going to kick it back to you. And you had talked about being in the long haul if you're going to commit to going global. And also talked about going back to basics and not forgetting about the fundamentals. So we know that it requires long-term commitment and focus to decide to go global. What is your advice on what companies and entrepreneurs to keep focused on that commitment, and what work goes into it given all the recent changes and really, quite frankly, uncertainty that we have ahead of us?
Well, thank you, Michelle. It's an honor for us to be working chiefly with small and medium-sized companies in the greater Philadelphia area, although we do work with large institutions and helping them to with their global initiatives, medical institutions, schools like universities like Temple and Drexel. But largely we work with small and medium-sized businesses. And when you look at, and I want to just share a few statistics with you and then go back to your question. There are around 7,000 exporters in the greater Philadelphia metro area. 89% of them are small and medium-sized businesses. And that's true nationally as well. So they create a lot of the $23 billion in exports, and that was recorded in 2018, that is generated by our metro region. So a lot of export sales, a lot of jobs that are supported by those export sales. In fact, if we look at the companies that we at the World Trade Center of Greater Philadelphia have assisted since we became a World Trade Center in 2002, those export sales figures that we have had a hand in helping to generate with our companies amounts to about $2 billion. So I start off with that because I want to encourage small businesses, and I'm glad to see from the polling that a number of them are already involved in global business, including the current Global Accelerator cohort, or are interested in going global. Because many times companies feel they're hesitant on entering global markets because they feel, well, I don't have a product or service that is geared for global markets, or I'm hesitant. I'm afraid of the risks. I'm afraid I'm not going to get paid, for example, and I don't know how to get started. I just don't know where can I get assistance. And so the fact of the matter is there are tremendous resources available to help companies grow their business, manage risk, including buyer defaults on payments. And to always remember that 95%, yes, we have a global downturn at the present time, and markets are just starting to open up. Travel is going to slowly open up. But 95% of the world's consumers lie beyond our borders. 7% of global purchasing power is outside of the United States. So in terms of diversifying markets, we encourage companies to consider going global, but to remember the fundamentals that you would apply if you were operating a successful business domestically. These apply internationally as well. So those are some of the key points that I wanted to make, but especially to let people know that if you're considering going global, and many startups, technology startups, go global at an earlier stage than your traditional companies. So there's great opportunity, but to know that there are resources available to help you look at your product, design the best market entry strategy, to look what's required for exporting, the logistics, the financing, the legal considerations, all of that we as an organization are prepared to provide, as well as other organizations in the region.
Great, thank you, Linda. I think it's really important to reinforce that point that you made about the fact that going global is still very much a viable possibility, even though things might be shifting and changing. So it's really great to hear, and especially great to know that we have resources right here for companies.
And one more thing, Michelle, if I may. There are great opportunities for minority-owned and women-owned businesses. We have a thriving immigrant community that is very entrepreneurial, innovative, and global markets represent an opportunity for these kinds of entrepreneurs and companies.
Yes, that's an excellent point. So arguably, you can go global right here in Philly. If you go to, because we have so many different people from all over the world who are living right here and have businesses right here, right in our backyard. So Ross, I'm going to call on you so that we can talk a little bit more about the other side of things. So really about customers and audience. So why do you think it is more important now than ever to reconnect and reassess the people that companies might be trying to connect with, whether it be customers or different audiences, depending on the business? Why is now the most important time to start to take another look at that?
It's a great question, and I think it all boils down to relationship. Whether we realize it or not, we have relationships with brands, and in many ways, those relationships do mimic personal and social relationships, although not exactly the same type of relationship. So customers want to feel heard. And especially during a time like we're going through right now, they want to feel that connection. They want to feel it even more so than ever, especially as we've been, kind of grounded in our homes for some time now. So I think that the importance of reconnecting and reassessing ties back to that core aspect of building the loyalty, building the relationship with the customer. When I think about branding, I always want to connect it back to segmentation, target marketing, and positioning. And I think that these are core principles. But nonetheless, some startups, and some larger companies, even so, don't always give these three concepts the attention that they should. So I think this is an opportunity for brands to kind of go back and look at who have been our segments that have enabled us to be successful. Should we continue with them? And then now, as some others were mentioning, there are opportunities to potentially pursue other segments while not losing sight of the original ones. So I think going back to who are our segments, how should we reach them, and then how does this position us in relation to our competitors? So this is an opportunity, for companies to reconnect and reassess their customer base, but also drive home some core aspects that maybe they didn't emphasize before. Especially right now, what customers want is they want customers to be authentic. They want them to show concern, not only for them, but for what's going on in society, both with the pandemic, and then obviously the civic unrest that's occurring both nationally as well as globally. These causes that are so important, and customers are looking to see how they will move in those directions, because they have the spending power to say, I'm going to support this company or that company based on not only the product that they're selling or the service or the experience, but what do they stand for, and do their values align with my values?
Thanks for that, Ross. I think that's right, and I think generally, right, it's probably good business practice to every now and then check in on who your customers are, who your audience is, how they're connecting with you, right? So all these things are really good sort of business practices, ongoing, and even more important now.
Absolutely.
Great, thanks, Ross. So yeah, I mean, I think about that a lot too with engagement, and just my 20-second thought here is that we've thought a lot about and do a lot of work in community engagement, and even think about what it means when you don't have the opportunity to meet in person. And really, it goes back to what Linda was saying about the fundamentals and going back to basics. It doesn't always have to rely on, as nice as it is to be in person together, we don't always need to do that, and really thinking about other ways that we can connect with people, even going old school and picking up a phone. So thanks for that input so far, Linda and Ross. And Michael, your question I have for you is, as an international investor and real estate developer, are you optimistic for the future? Do you think foreign investment in the region will decrease? What major trends do you see in terms of overseas opportunities for local companies? That's a lot of questions, and the first one's really big, so I saved you for last. I can repeat any parts of that, but the first chunk of that was, are you optimistic about the future, and do you think foreign investment in the region will decrease?
Well, it's easy and fun to deal with the big questions because you don't have to be specific. You don't really have to know anything. You could just be a philosopher, so to speak. First of all, let me say one thing as an introduction. What really intrigues me about the work that is going on here is the interconnectivity on both sides of the fence, both bringing people in from overseas and sending people back over. In classic economic development terms, it was very mercantilistic. My job in economic development was to protect my own companies and keep them in New York if everybody else was trying to steal them, particularly New Jersey, Texas, Connecticut, and Florida, and try to steal companies from somebody else. And ultimately, that's a zero-sum game, because what you wind up doing is spending a lot of taxpayers' money on trying to attract a company from one place to another, and you're not really increasing the base any. and you're making yourself vulnerable to the same kind of poaching. So what I get out of what you're really trying to do here is creating a win-win situation where there's a multiple growth, and the connectivity that you have by keeping companies abroad and tying them to what we can do here creates a different kind of growth model. That's something I'm trying to learn about, and I think that's a great way of approaching it. Generally, I'm optimistic mainly because things are so bad right now. Using the example of New York City, we were one of the worst cities in the world in 1976. In other words, when New York went bankrupt, it wasn't a sudden event. It was a result of a continued deterioration over many decades, from being a world-class city to being a city under siege with high crime rates and the inability to pay its bills, and without any real leadership, a series of mayors and council people that really reflected the old democratic machine politics. And the shock of bankruptcy really forced severe changes in the world. Talking about pivot, I think New York City made a tremendous pivot in the 70s, and the work that was done then, I truly believe, was one of the reasons for creating the base that made New York into a world-class city. And now they're facing something similar. I think New York is under unique types of pressures because of COVID, and the question is how they will deal with it, and perhaps more important, how we will deal with it. So I think that given our system, which I believe maximizes creativity and can take advantage of crises, I'm optimistic because I think we're breaking the mold a little bit and opening up ideas. I think in particular, Philadelphia has an opportunity to truly capitalize on that. Philadelphia's done extremely well. I grew up here. Many people like me who grew up here and left when the city was in deep decline, and we're always tied to the city, but recognize that, or we're concerned that it would never come back. But it clearly has started to come back over the years, built exactly in the kind of connectivity that you're talking about now. And I think the combination of having a very attractive culture here, not just the high culture like the museums and the university, but a culture of connectivity, of openness, I think is going to attract a lot of people here. I think that a big open issue is whether, going back to my old economic development days, we can steal activity from New York City. I think New York is under unique pressures, and having an attractive urban environment like Philadelphia can really attract those kind of people here. It's not really foreign, but in many ways it's a center, creates a center of activity. I also think that that we can probably deal better with COVID, notwithstanding the increases in non-physical connectivity that you talked about. I don't think there's any real substitute for face-to-face meetings. I think that's where all the best ideas get done, the interaction between people. And a lot of people are saying, myself included, that, hey, we can work remotely and we're doing very well. But I believe that's the case only because the structures have already been completed. We work in teams, we have relationships. Those relationships were developed over many years of close connectivity, physical connectivity, and they can probably go on for some while. They can work on their own momentum, but ultimately that momentum slows down. And particularly, I think the younger people who are just starting their careers that haven't yet created that base need to be in cities, and they need to have that close connectivity. So I think that Philadelphia as a city will ultimately attract people simply because it's a city, but I think it will attract people even more because it's a special kind of city, and it will be very important to emphasize those benefits. Ultimately, though, I think it really boils down in terms of creating international connectivity, of intense marketing. What's the right program? In the old days, you would market through your chambers of commerce, and maybe there would be somebody in government that would try to market. Usually the best marketing was done by private developers that were trying to bring people into their projects, and they put a lot of muscle and a lot of really intelligent and intense activity into it. The question is now, what's going to really lead that? Will it be the quasi-public sector, the kinds of institutions like the Science Center? Will it be the private developer community? Will it be the Chamber of Commerce, the administration, or will it be something even beyond that? I'm not quite sure, but I do know that certainly for my own business, I don't think I can accomplish the job of attracting people either for companies that I want to invest in and bring them to the U.S. I think I need to work in a complex of environment with companies like yours and operations like yours, as well as mostly academic institutions. I think academic institutions, I happen to be close to Temple. I think they're real draws and they should be developed that way. But probably it's going to take a coordinated effort and a lot of intense focus on that. Hopefully, notwithstanding what I just said about the old model not working as well, I do think there's still a role for some kind of government assistance to truly provide an inducement for people that just can't afford to come here or just don't have the resources to come here. So I guess that's a long-winded way of saying generally I'm optimistic.
Well, you know, I did throw that philosophical question to you, so that was a nice, robust answer and very appropriate because you're sitting in that that what looks like a rocking chair that invokes a lot of wisdom.
We're the gray hairs.
Thank you, Michael. So we do have a few more minutes, and I do want to thank Mark for his question that I'm pulling up now. So this is for anybody who wants to take it here, but what industry does everyone think will see the most permanent changes over the medium and long term? And Linda, Ross, Michael, any of you guys can take that.
I think it's really going to be industries that don't exist. I think the real issue is that this process is probably going to speed up the creative destruction that's just been a component of our system for a long time. I noticed that Blandine had sent in on the chats that retail and office space will be affected. I do believe that they will be affected, but I think there are counter forces working there. On the one hand, what I see in office space is that right now people are looking to decentralize. A lot of companies are now putting people on permanent remote outlook. My own law firm is doing that. On the other hand, I don't think anybody can escape that physical connectivity or the need for a center. So probably what will happen is you'll have firms providing more space internally for each individual. At one point in hard markets like New York, space was down to 50 square foot per person, particularly in the WeWorks or other connectivity centers, down from 300 to 400 square feet for executive type offices. That was true a number of years ago. So it could be that those two factors where we might have to give 200 to 300 square feet per person, even in what will become densely populated spaces, may well offset that remote working. In retail, I think it's going to become a new industry altogether. What I'm seeing in retail, particularly with the company SubNation that I'm working with, that I mentioned before, they've gone through a real pivot driven by market forces, and I think will be speeded up by COVID, but of creating experiences. For example, they're now doing gaming centers rather than doing retail mall spaces. And I think what people are now going to look for, since you can buy anything you want online, they're going to look for the experience, either the pure shopping experience of going into an unusual environment and getting specialty type of projects that you want to feel and as well as seek directly, but probably more of the experience. Maybe museums will be a more of a factor. I use New York, for example. I think most of the growth in New York retail has really been in the museum space.
Right.
That's my feeling about those two markets.
Great. Yeah, and Blondine did mention also in the chat real estate and retail. So you must have read her mind. Karina Karina mentioned medicine, and I couldn't agree more. And I also think healthcare is also evolving and changing, especially with telehealth and how that seems to be a really effective way for people to talk with doctors. Again, we have a couple more minutes here, but Ross and Linda, do you have any other thoughts on that particular question?
Yes, Michelle, and following on what Karina had said, I think the region on a positive side as a result of the pandemic too, is well positioned in the whole area of life sciences and biotech, where they were always very strong, medical devices, medical equipment. But I think what we've experienced over the past several months and into the near term is going to really highlight the leadership role that this region plays. And I see my colleagues, Pierre Olivier and Samuel from the Department of Commerce here, and they well know how much they have worked with Lauren Schwartz, who's in charge of international for the Commerce Department, in attracting companies in those sectors. So I think that bodes well for greater Philadelphia. And the other thing that I would like to add is the importance of, we've talked about remaining connected virtually for the present time, and maybe there'll be an aspect of working virtually that will continue after business resumes in a more traditional fashion. But what we find one of the biggest benefits that we offer as an organization is the ability to bring companies together, to talk amongst themselves, to learn from each other, best practices, lessons learned. And we're continuing to gather companies virtually to be able to do that and to connect them with the over 300 World Trade Centers throughout the world that are part of the association to which we belong. And that's a wonderful resource, Michael, for attracting inward investment as well as connecting our companies with potential customers around the world.
Great, thanks, Linda. And Ross, I am going to ask you the same question, but just want to also say that anybody who is here for the pitches, just sit tight. We're wrapping up in 1 to 2 minutes here. Ross, you already mentioned higher ed pivoting, and we'll expect to see some really interesting changes, I'm sure, for the long haul. But any other thoughts about that or other markets that you think will change in the medium to long?
Sure. Of course, a number of them have already been mentioned, so I won't repeat those. But one that jumps out to me is live entertainment, of course. So if we're thinking about anything where obviously large groups of people will be gathering to, share that joy and ethos of being with others, that is going to, there's going to be a dramatic change in that. So how will musicians adapt to this? Who are, attempting to build their fan base and make a living, playing to live audiences. You think about the theater, how will that adapt and adjust? Even on a smaller scale, the movie industry, what will happen there? We've already seen declines in that over the last few years as more and more people are streaming movies, but there are some specialty theaters, independent films, movie houses that are really going to have to adjust. And then the big one that comes to mind for me as a Philadelphian and a sports fan is if you look at professional sports. So how are they going to deal with this? So, one thing that jumps out to me is how is virtual reality and all of the technological advances going to play a role in this? I think people are going to be reluctant to go back to those mass gatherings, at least to Mark's question, in the medium as well as the long term. And what is the opportunity there, for live entertainment to share with others, but also experience something?
Yeah, thanks, Ross.
Sure.
Those are really great points. Well, I want to thank all of our panelists. I feel like I can do this little hand clap for everybody. Thanks, Michael, Linda, and Ross, and for everybody for attending. Hopefully this session gave you some best practices to take away, and also maybe some ideas on areas where you should explore if you're looking to start a new business or expand your services or products. I want to wish all of the companies luck in their pitches. If you are here for the pitches, you are in the right place.